Welcome to Slash Bash, where today I'm bringing you a compilation of some of the best malicious compliance stories of 2021. If you can't do it perfect, then don't do it. No problem. Let's jump right in. I've sat on this story for a while and figured I'd share it. Backstory, I worked retail when I was younger. Like most people, it was a mixed bag, and some of my best and worst memories involve my time working in retail chains. I worked in footwear in a then blossoming sporting goods franchise and had a real knack for it. It was rewarding helping people find shoes in their sizes, and it was heartwarming at times, especially when people with disabilities showed up and really needed hands-on assistance with things. That was a core value the company had at the time. My hiring supervisor, whose name isn't important, was amazing, and the staff was really cool too. We all liked and respected him a lot. But alas, like many good things, it came to a sudden and forceful end. Upper management decided change was in order and shifted the supervisors, opening a spot in my department. That's when the new supervisor, henceforth known as Brandy, came in. Brandy was a transfer from another store 30 minutes away. The entire supervisor team knew and were not fond of her, but she filled a void, and the district manager and store manager were big fans of hers for reasons unknown. We were warned that she was a woman of many faces and would tell you or promise you things you'd never get. I learned this about her fairly quickly, and before she even knew the staff, our strong suits, our schedules, or our names, she had a set list of things she wanted done and could not be deviated from. There was also word going around she'd like to make staffing changes and hire her own people when she came in. Morale died fairly quickly within the first week she was there. In short, she was a nightmare for almost the entire store. Now to the actual story. Brandy's first day was on a particularly busy summer day, and before I could even walk back to my section, I could hear her voice calling over the intercom constantly. Along the way, I was greeted by the morning staff, who gave me a quick rundown of her and what she was like, then told me to have fun. Oh boy, I thought to myself. I found her in the back near the cleats and introduced myself. You have your tasks assigned to you already, and I want all of the displays finished in your areas before you leave today. I thought this was strange because I had set the displays for those exact sections the night prior, all according to the franchise standards, firmly stuffed to look like a foot was in them. No visible laces shown, and even the laces changed to go inside the shoe so they didn't obstruct the view of the top of the shoe. They were signed off as completed by the lead on duty and even complimented. I was proud of my work. I went back to the sections I did the night before and looked them over for a few seconds, super confused. I shrugged it off and set to checking or at least restuffing a few to see if I had missed something. Nope, nothing. But I continued on as I had been instructed and did my job, and things seemed like they were going pretty smooth. Later on that afternoon, Brandy came back up to me, asked me when I was going to finish my displays, and I told her that I had. She looked at me and then back at my displays and made a look of disgust and said, "You're going to leave them like that?" "Like what?" I said back, confused. Nothing I did was ever really a problem in the past, and I really didn't want to piss her off because I loved my job and it was my first day with her. She scoffed and said, "Like this," and then grabbed a broken metal peg off a sock and cap and proceeded to jam as much paper as humanly possible in the shoe until it couldn't hold any more. No lie, the shoe felt like someone had filled it with concrete, and the fabric even protruded on some shoes because of the pressure. It was not pretty or guideline. After watching how she did it, I just stood there dumbstruck because, again, this went against almost all of my training up to that point. Then she started in on me. No matter how hard I tried to give her what she wanted but still meet the guideline I'd been trained for, she didn't like it and would get me to do them again. This went on for a little bit, and then she flipped up. After an agonizing amount of time, she grabbed a shoe from me and said, "No! Do it perfect. If you can't do it perfect, then don't even try. Just leave it for someone else to do." Let me remind you that she had a full list of other things she wanted done, but she rang a bell I wasn't going to ignore. So, instead of giving me another task, she gave me a loophole. I capitalized fully. Cue malicious compliance. After an emotional wrecking like the one she had given me, I excitedly said, "Okay," and walked away to help customers. I left her there with the display still in her hand. She also said this within earshot of several other employees that were already sour with her. She didn't want me to try if I couldn't be perfect. Fine, that was exactly what I did. I did nothing on that list for 4 months. I don't even remember anything it says on it. You might be wondering to yourself, how did you not get fired? Well, she tried, several times. Anytime she would try to write me up, I would quote her exact words to her, the store supervisor, the leads, the district manager, and even some people in HR when they came to visit. Eventually, she was told to stop because her attempts could be viewed as retaliation, and that was a huge corporate no-no. I still provided excellent customer service and got rave reviews and compliments when customers went to checkout, and the store manager and I got along really well, so they were hesitant to push too hard. A few months later, I changed departments and then met my now wife on a store setup trip and moved across the state. When she found out I was quitting, she pretended to be upset, but everyone knew she wanted me gone. She was gone within a year of me leaving. No clue why. Totally worth it. Thanks for the funny memories, Brandy. The owner refused to let me do jury duty. This was back in the 80s, my first job, working as maintenance man at a local hotel. I'd been working there part-time since I was 16, and when I turned 18, I got a notice to attend jury duty. I picked a week and I let my boss know. The owner of the hotel found out. He was always a complete unreasonable jerk to all the employees, and he sees me in the hallway and tells me that I need to do whatever it takes to get out of jury duty because he needs me at the hotel that week for a large dog show, clogged drains, etc. And if I'm not at work, I'm fired. When I get to jury duty, day 1, I get selected to a week-long trial, and the judge asks jurors if there's any reason we cannot serve on the jury. They go around. When they get to me, I'm nervous. I've never been in court before, and I'm too scared to lie. I tell the judge that the owner of the business I work at will fire me if I'm not back today, and said I needed to do everything I can to get out of jury duty or I'm fired. Other than that, I'm fine serving. The judge looks pissed. The judge has me approach the bench, asks for the name of the owner, the location, etc. Then he hands the court officer a paper and says something to the officer. The judge still looks pissed. I'm told to return to the jury box. About an hour later, still selecting a jury at that point, the officer returns with the owner, visibly shaken, in handcuffs, and walked to the front of the judge's bench. The owner is standing in front of the judge. The judge asks him questions which he apologetically tries to worm out of. Then the judge, looking even more pissed, instructs him that I will be here for jury duty. I will serve as long as I need to, and he should not do anything to retaliate against me. And that the judge is filing charges and will be instructing the clerk to check with me regularly, and if for any reason I am fired or face any disciplinary action at work, he will hold the owner in contempt, violation of a court order, etc. A bunch of legal stuff. And he will spend time behind bars thinking about how important jury duty is. Then the judge makes him apologize to me in court. I made it onto the jury and I served the week. I reported back to work the following week. I expected some blowback, but I never got fired, none of my shifts were changed, and I got paid for my time in jury. I didn't ask why I got paid. The clerk did check back a few times, and I was told to call the judge's clerk direct phone number if anything happened. It was awesome. I was pretty much bulletproof and worked until I saved enough to go back to school. Your contract is almost up. You should maybe start looking for other positions. Let's jump right in. Obligatory long-time lurker, first post, on mobile, etc. This isn't my story, but my partner's, Doug. He's given me permission to post. First, a little background. Doug works for one of the larger banks here in Canada. For someone without post-secondary, he's done incredibly well for himself. He's 28 now and has been working with this bank for about 9 years. He started as a teller and worked his way all the way up to just below a branch manager, but more customer service oriented. The story starts February 2020, right as COVID was starting to snowball here. Doug had worked in a few different branches over the years and is quite personable. When a former colleague told him about a position in the wealth department, he thought it might be good for a change. It was also work from a small office downtown, which meant he didn't have to go into a branch every day and deal with customers and employees face to face. He decided to apply. With a good recommendation, he got an interview. How this position works is he essentially would be working directly for two big investment banker types, but there was an office manager, we'll call her Sarah, who he also reported to as well. This office manager trained him, provided support, etc. During the interview, he was told that the base salary for the new position was $10,000 per year less, but there was monthly bonuses paid out that would bring him well over the salary cap for his previous position. Once he accepted, it didn't really sit well with me since he didn't get that in writing. Got along wonderfully with his investment banker bosses. They loved having someone so personable who also had connections in branch. The divisions were kept pretty church and state, retail and wealth, so it saved a lot of time having Doug around since he could just message friends from retail to get information without having to go through all the typical hoops. He also knew most of the systems already and got all the courses he needed very quickly. Once COVID got bad, offices were shut down. Everyone had to work from home. Since Doug was new, he kind of got shafted. He was one of the last people to get a laptop. You can't use your own? Had one monitor, regularly got stuck going into the office to mail things. Also, since he was new, he had a lot of questions and needed help regularly. With work from home, that meant Sarah had to put in a lot of effort to answer his questions. She was a miserable woman. She was condescending, took a long time to answer him, or would just say, "Figure it out." It was incredibly frustrating for Doug, especially considering the bonus he was receiving was a fraction of what he was promised. He was making considerably less money and was doing a lot more work. After about a year, February 2021, at this point, Doug was doing very well at his position. The investment bankers regularly praised him, they even got him fancy Christmas gifts. The only downside was Sarah. She still was giving Doug a very hard time and just generally was being rude and condescending. When the end of Doug's first year rolled around, Sarah had a meeting with him about some issues a client was having. At the end of the meeting, she said, "Since your contract renewal is coming up, you might want to consider keeping your options open and looking for some other positions in other departments." Doug and Sarah both knew this was an empty threat since his actual bosses basically needed him at this point. One of them started having some pretty serious health issues, and Doug was a superstar helping him through it while maintaining his book of business. We knew this was just Sarah trying to make him feel small. Even still, Doug was pretty upset after hearing this. He had been putting in 12-hour days for less money and was borderline being bullied by Sarah the entire time. So he decided to take her advice. He sent out one application to a different division of the bank, got a call back the same day. Turns out the lady who runs this division for our province used to work with Doug. She was his branch manager back when he was a teller. With this bank, in order to move to other departments, they touch base with your current boss. They spoke to both of his investment banker bosses, and they were taken by total surprise. They called Doug to see why he was quitting since he was doing so well. They had no idea Sarah had promised him more money in the interview and that he took a pay cut to be there. They had no idea Sarah had been treating him the way she had been since they didn't interact with her often. A day or two later, he had a Zoom meeting with the investment banker bosses and Sarah. They tried to counteroffer him the same salary, $17,000 more per year, and Sarah changed her tune completely. Sarah tried to backpedal on what she'd said about looking for other positions. Doug politely declined their offer and accepted the new position, partly because he felt taken advantage of since they were so easily able to give him almost a $20,000 pay raise, but also because he didn't feel secure in the position due to Sarah's remarks. His investment banker bosses still call him regularly 4 months later to help with clients. Some of their clients only want to speak with Doug, or they need Doug's help with systems he designed to make their lives easier. Now, Doug works from home still, makes $17,000 more than he did in the wealth department, and his investment banker bosses pay him a few hundred a week for his freelance work. Oh, and the best part of it all is that Sarah took on all of Doug's duties for months while they found his replacement. Doug's investment banker bosses told him their new assistant is someone who worked in the mailroom of the office. He took 3 attempts to pass his exams and has no idea what he's doing. If I told you, it wouldn't be hidden. In the early noughties, I took a contract job with one of my previous employers. They wanted someone they didn't have to train and that needed no supervision, and were willing to pay me the almost incredible amount I demanded to smooth my hurt feelings from the layoff. The job was easy: age out 5 years of files to match their new retention scheme at my convenience. The new people the company had acquired in my absence, however, didn't want to let it be easy. Every evening, I'd return to my office to find it unlocked and rifled through. Boxes would have their security seals cut open, inventory lists would be missing, and entire stacks of files would mysteriously make their way back to the file room. You better bet I raised hell up the chain, but the requests made on my behalf seemed to fall on deaf ears. One of the perps even had the nerve to email me saying I was only a temp and that if I had a file she wanted, she would get it and there was nothing short of hiding them that would stop her. So that's what I did. In the back of the warehouse was a small room they'd once used to store coolant for mainframes, and I happened to know where a spare key was kept. All 4,100 files were vanished from my office and the file room and hidden away there. Crap hit the fan Monday morning when the perp who emailed me couldn't find an 11-year-old file she wanted. After letting herself into my office and finding it bare, she had the nerve to complain over email. I can't find file 90117 in the file room or in your office. That's because I took your fantastic suggestion and hid it, as well as every other file about to be aged out. They are not available. Please use the digital archive. Where did you hide it? If I told you, it would no longer be hidden. Use the digital archive. Listen, you insubordinate little crap. I want that file and I want it delivered to my desk now. You can't always get what you want. Use the digital archive. Her final email, CC'd to her boss, called me a loser and suggested I get my unemployment forms filled out. Her boss had other ideas. Please come see me. Obviously, my last instruction to stay out of other people's offices was insufficient. We will also need to have a discussion about how emailing a very expensive consultant with improper demands has probably cost the company more than we pay you in a week. From that point on, I made sure to show up just early enough to catch the perp on her way out the door and smile at her. IT is not willing to spend $100 on a hard drive, so it costs $22,000 of work time. I had a job where I had a computer which was incidentally also the web server for a very important internal web application. I thought this was really stupid that it wasn't in a server room being managed by IT, but for some weird reason they wouldn't do it. I didn't use this application or have anything to do with it, but it took up a large chunk of the hard drive and made it slow. I didn't even know what it was on the hard drive, so there was a bunch of old development software I could never remove for fear of harming the application. I was also not permitted to turn the machine off or even sign out nights or weekends, so it would be running whenever anyone needed the application. I had to just lock the screen and leave it. This application was apparently something developed by my department before I joined the company, and everyone involved with it was no longer there. Nobody really knew anything about how it worked other than that this machine had to be running and signed in, and it wasn't developed in our normal system and wasn't in our code repository. By the end of my time with the company, they had such turnover that I was literally the only person in the department who knew it was even there. I was a web developer and I required a vast amount of disk space for my work, for reasons mostly relating to how moronic management was about process. I had to keep 3 complete copies of everything the company ever developed. I often ran out of disk space. I had to use increasingly desperate measures to deal with this, up to and including deleting anything that Microsoft included with Windows that I didn't actually need, like the camera app on a PC with no camera. It quickly got to the point that I had to call IT to tell them that my PC was becoming unusable due to disk space and could they please do something about it. I suggested that because of this application, they might want to take this PC into management and give me a different one. I thought they would do something like replace the computer. Identical would be fine as long as it didn't have this application on it, or give it a larger internal disk, or maybe even just attach an external disk. I would still have a slow machine, but I'd have had the space to do my work. Instead, they told me that I'd have to remove what I could and defrag the disk to make more space, and I would just have to suffer, and please don't call them about this again. Talked to my boss and was told that IT's word was final and I would just have to deal with it. So how it worked was the machine would get bad. I'd remove what I could and start a defragment. Then the machine would become too slow for me to use for about 24 hours, during which time I could do no work. This happened about once a week, so it took about 1/5 of my time, not counting time spent looking for stuff to delete. I kept telling management this was happening, and they kept telling me to shut up and deal with it. At least, when they wanted me to do stuff and my answer was I can't, my computer is busy clearing disk space and is presently unusable, they moaned but understood and left me alone. So, because IT was too lazy to do anything, management was too lazy to go to bat for me, and the company was unwilling to spend $100 on an external hard drive, they got to spend over $22,000 a year on salary for me to sit around and wait for the machine to make some space so I could do my work. That wasn't my salary. That was the portion of my salary that they were wasting on this problem, not counting the value of the time of everyone else that had to do my work while I couldn't. I was getting to the point that I wouldn't be able to deal with it at all. There wasn't anything left to delete, and defragging wasn't reclaiming any more space. The company's internal software took up more and more space every day. I estimated I had about a week left before it became fully unusable, when I had a heart attack and a stroke, and I never went back. I occasionally think, admittedly with some glee, of the panic there must have been when someone finally turned off the computer and sent it to IT to be wiped. A few hours later, panicked users would have started calling, demanding to know where the precious application that they couldn't live without was. Only for my evil management to say, honestly, what application? What does a translator have to do to get fired? This is a story that was told to me by a relative of some relatives a long time ago, 20 plus years. I'll try to recount it as I remember it. I believe the owner of this malicious compliance may have been exaggerating a bit, but it did end up giving me a nice chuckle. So this distant relative, let's call him Joe, was working as a contractor translator at an international organization, specialized in Arabic to English and vice versa. Now it's Joe's job, working in the translator room, to listen and then translate into the microphone so that the other delegates can listen to the translation through their headsets. This was his last week on the job. So at an international summit, the leader of a delegation from a rich Gulf state gets to the podium and starts to deliver his speech in Arabic. A good minute into the speech, and Joe hasn't translated a word. Finally, he says in English, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," and then waits a few more seconds before translating the remainder of the speech. Joe's supervisor, Martha, who he has had many problems with, notices this and asks why he waited so long before just saying good morning. He said because the introductory welcome of most of these speeches is just so long and doesn't really add much benefit, so it wasn't worth translating it word for word. Just an FYI, it usually goes something like this. Peace be upon you, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, your excellencies, kings and queens, presidents and dignitaries, and a couple more sentences along those lines. Martha was livid. You translate every word they say word for word, nothing less. If they make a mistake, you translate it as is. If they use a wrong word, you translate it as it is. There is no selecting what you translate and what you don't. This apparently did not go well with Joe, and he was waiting for the right opportunity to maliciously comply. He didn't have to wait very long. A couple of speeches later, and the delegate from Japan gets up and starts his speech in English. Now, Joe had to translate everything from English to Arabic. Towards the end of the political speech is the line, "We are very supportive of any and all democratic principles. The election process is very important to the people of Japan." Joe is translating in tandem, and as soon as Joe stops, all non-English speakers that were listening in on the Arabic translation were in fits. Martha once again notices this and looks to see who is translating. Her eyes glare at Joe. "What did you do?" "Me? I translated what they said word for word." Just an FYI, many countries that don't use English as a primary or secondary language and that utilize languages that are missing certain sounds pronounce things differently. For example, the letter P doesn't have a counterpart in the Arabic language, so most Arabic-only speakers will pronounce it as B, since it's the closest sounding one. In Japan, for reasons I don't know, the L and R pronunciations in English are reversed. I was once offered a bowl of rice at a restaurant. Bowl of rice. Now, Martha doesn't understand Arabic, she was specialized in Spanish, so she had to find a person that had heard what was said and ask why they were laughing. This is what Joe said in Arabic. "We are very supportive of any and all democratic principles. The erection process is very important to the people of Japan, and to all Arabs as well, if I might add." He translated word for word and didn't drop anything. He understood exactly what they were saying, but chose to follow the rules instead. If anything, he spiced it up a little. That was his last shift. Following the work manual to the letter can cost the store money. So this happened back around 2015 when I worked at our favorite office supply company that resembles a paper-stabbing paperclip. I was a pretty good employee. I worked in the tech section. I upsold the BS that they wanted us to upsell and downsold the crap they wanted us to downsell. I had been there for a while, so I noticed some inefficiencies in the procedures in the computer repair bench that I was working at, so I started modifying the procedures and our productivity improved a little. The managers didn't care, customers were happy that their computers were actually done on time, everything was going smoothly except for this one guy in the morning shift. For no explained reason, he hated me. I flat out asked him once what his problem was, and he pretended that there was nothing wrong, etc. Well, we get a new manager, and I get my butt handed to me about how this guy didn't like how I was doing things because it wasn't per the manual. When I explained that it was because of me that our on-time numbers went up, she didn't care and told me to stick to the employee handbook. Cue my malicious compliance. Later that day or the next, I noticed this husband and wife rolling to the cash register with a, if memory serves me right, a $1,000 printer. Now, employee training explicitly states that if a customer is going to make an unwise purchase, that you should coach them in finding the correct item. The logic behind that being that if they realize you helped them save money, they'll be willing to return. So I politely approached them, greeted them, and proudly watched the steam come out of my manager's ears when they happily walked out with a $35 printer instead. Hey, I'm just following the employee handbook. The boss never learned her lesson. I quit like a week later because I had to prepare for finals, and last I heard, the store went downhill from there. Force me to take unpaid time off? It's going to be more time than you expect. I used to work at this one coffee shop, my first chain coffee shop after working only at local or family-run ones. Simply put, it was hell. Owners would micromanage everything without knowing anything about how the business ran, never listened to their staff, and only cared about the money. Typical out-of-touch owners of a business. I was hired to replace a manager that had walked out of one of their locations, leaving it with only part-time staff. I was told I was being hired on as the acting manager until they either hired someone else or they felt I would be a good fit for the position after my 6 months probation. I won't go into everything that went wrong because there's a lot, but to summarize, it was literal hell. I was expected to cover all no-shows, which had me working 90 to 100 hours a week. I wasn't allowed to fire anyone no matter how many things they did wrong. Someone actually showed up to work drunk, and I still wasn't allowed to fire them. And any changes I wanted to implement were shot down, like replacing old parts in the espresso machine, shortening our hours to save money on labor, bringing in items that customers would always ask for. I was stressed, overworked, and irritated as hell when the owner comes in to talk to me about sales for the store. We weren't making enough to warrant the hours I had scheduled, and he wasn't going to pay me any more overtime. I would only work the hours I'm scheduled, and if someone no-showed, I had to have someone else cover those shifts. I tried to explain to him that I only came in when no one else would cover. It just so happened that the people he allowed to continue to work here had terrible availability. Making the schedule was already hard enough. Getting someone other than myself to come in on their day off was next to impossible. On top of all that, I had to learn the ropes myself. There was no one to train me, so all the managerial knowledge, ordering, scheduling, I learned myself. No one other than me knew how to order coffee, had the numbers for the repair guys, anything other than making coffee and using the till. I was the only one that knew. He wasn't hearing any of it. All I'm hearing is excuses. This is your store. If you can't handle running it, I'll start looking for someone who will. Wasn't that the plan though? It's been 3 months since my probation period ended, and you never gave me the manager position, so I assumed you were looking for someone to take over. I think it's in your best interest to take some time off. Start thinking about your position here and whether you actually want to start moving up. I had mentioned in the interview I was looking forward to working my way up in the business. I can't. There's no one to cover me. You're taking this time off. Is this a paid break? No. Consider this a timeout for you to get yourself sorted. Take the 2 weeks to rest and we'll see what your position will be like when you get back. Owner, I can't really afford to take that amount of time off. I can't even take 2 days off without having to come in and cover. Don't worry about the business right now. It'll run without you. Now, to put into perspective, I was basically the manager at that point. I made the schedules, I did the orders, I knew the codes to the safe and the alarm. I wasn't allowed to hire someone to assist me, and no one worked enough time to be able to cover even half my shifts. I knew this, the staff knew this, customers knew it. I made sure to block all work numbers and spent those 2 weeks looking for another job. I managed to find one after a few days that paid significantly more. I sent my resignation email to payroll and the owner, knowing he never checks it, deleted my account off the POS system. Being a manager means I have access to it from home. I spent the rest of the leave catching up on well-deserved sleep, having blocked all work numbers. I'm not getting paid, so I'm not working. According to my coworkers, stuff started going wrong the next day. One of the openers didn't show and the next staff member didn't have keys. The owner wasn't answering his phone, so they left a message. The owner didn't show up until one of the regulars called asking if the place was closed down. He showed up 4 hours after they were supposed to open. The orders weren't done, inventory was missed, 4 no-shows, you name it, it went wrong. The owner tried every way he could to get a hold of me, even using a customer's phone to call me. Too bad I didn't answer any calls that weren't in my contacts already. After 2 weeks, I turned my phone back on and get a call the same day from the owner. We agreed to meet the next day. So, you've had some time to think. I have. It's really given me perspective on my position here. We can start you back on your normal hours for now, and we're looking for a manager to take on more of your responsibilities. Oh, that's good. I'm actually quitting. He was silent for a few minutes. I think he was waiting for me to tell him I was kidding. Sucks for you, buddy. I'm serious. I've already emailed payroll and removed my login from the computer. Here are my keys. Good luck. And I left. The owner tried calling me a few times, but stopped once I told him to check his email. I was on okay terms with some of the staff that worked there, and apparently the majority of them had quit after I left. The owner did find a replacement pretty quickly, but without anyone to train them, the owner didn't know anything about running the business. They were flipped from the get-go and left pretty soon after they were hired. I'm always checking reviews from customers and employees, and they have consistently sucked for the past year and seem to be on a downward trend over the past year. You'll take breaks when I tell you to. I used to work at a call center where we would get flooded with calls constantly. This is a story of how a busybody boss thought they understood everything since they were in charge. At my work, we were given 2 15-minute breaks and 1 45-minute lunch break. The breaks were scheduled into our day so you could see when they would be, but this would change day by day. My role was a bit different than the normal agents, as I was specifically dealing with the higher issue calls. These calls could take up to an hour to complete, and the caller would need to stay on the line unless they were fine with a call back later, but this was rarely the case. Since I never knew when I would be getting these calls, my break time were a shot in the dark if I would or wouldn't be on a call. I would just take them as soon as the call was done if they ever intersected, which they did 99% of the time. Enter my boss. During a performance review, I hit all the marks except for attendance. I asked about this as I know I missed a few days, but always with a reasonable update for time frame and never a no-show day where there is no warning that I'm not coming in. My boss stated that attendance also applies to break and lunch times, and since I rarely took them at the requested time, I was getting written up. I explained my role that they hired me for and the challenges involved. They did not care and stated I needed to take breaks when I was told to. I asked for them to send me an email so that I could print it out, put it on my desk, and never forget again. My boss smiled ear to ear, probably because they thought I was groveling at that point, and sure enough, they sent one, stating in the email, "You must take your breaks only when the schedule tells you to, no time else. There is no excuse." I saved it, printed it out, sent a copy to my own email, and followed it to the letter. Of course, that same day it happened. I had a long call that crossed over into my break time. I asked the customer if it would be okay for me to call them back. They said no. I told them that unfortunately I couldn't stay on the line as I had to take my break. They became enraged and demanded to speak with my boss. When I told my boss the problem, my boss said that I needed to apologize to the customer and finish the call. I showed my boss the email they had just sent to me and said, "You told me to take my break at this time, no matter what. I'm just doing what you told me to do. I'm taking my break. Would you like the customer transferred over to you, or should I just hang up?" They had me transfer the call over to them, but from that day on, I never had a missed attendance mark. God, busybody bosses are the worst. Forced to honor a contract and then asked to sign a new one. This was over 20 years ago, but I was reminded of it today and thought it would be appreciated here. When I was 16, I got my driver's license and a job delivering the newspaper. I had about 225 papers per day and 300 on Sundays. The pay was decent for a kid, and it only took about 2 hours to finish my deliveries. It was great in the summer, then school started and it got really hard. I was sleeping in class and making mistakes. I had to wake up at 4 a.m. to deliver, and going to bed early meant I had a serious case of fear of missing out because my friends hung out until 8 or 9 every day. So I asked my boss if I could get out of my 6-month contract. He was super cool up until this point, and I honestly thought he'd let me slide as long as he had a replacement. I was wrong. He treated me like a villain and gave me the whole speech about honoring our commitments and how I need to learn respect for myself, and if I backed out of the contract, then he'd come after me for a bunch of money in fees and penalties. Whatever, I only had 2 months left in my contract. My mom was super cool and would drive my route for me sometimes, and I went to bed earlier. About 2 weeks after the contract discussion with my boss, he stopped by my house to tell me about some changes with my route. He says, "Yeah, it'll be so great for the customer because instead of 6 a.m., they'll get their paper by 5 a.m., so you should see an increase in happy customers." Oh, and you'll be getting a small raise because from now on, the paper won't be delivered to your house on a pallet. Instead, you'll drive down to a town 15 minutes away and get your papers between 1:30 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. I mean, he pitched this to me like it was the greatest news ever. I reminded him that I'm in high school and I can't be waking up at 1 a.m., and I told him there's no way this is better for me. He kind of blew off my concerns and I said, Don, my contract says that the papers will be delivered to my house no later than 4 a.m. and that it is my responsibility to deliver them by 6 a.m. That is what I agreed to, and that is what I will do until my contract is up. He again blew me off and said, oh yeah, no big deal. We'll get you a new contract with the changes, but the end date will be your original end date, so it's all good. I admit that I was not a super clever kid, but I began to see my way out. I said I wasn't going to sign a new contract and that I'd recently been taught that it's important to honor the deals we make and how important it was that I follow through with my commitments. He could hear the sarcasm dripping off my words, and he thought he could power trip me into compliance. He got mad and threatened to fire me if I don't sign a new contract. I actually laughed at him and said that'd be great. I was a bit of a little shit to him at this point, and I told him if the papers showed up to my driveway before 4 a.m., then I'd deliver them, but if not, then I'd consider it a breach of contract and I'd have to terminate my relationship with the newspaper. I was in a great mood and had no problems at all. It was actually my mom who was furious that they'd pull these changes on a high school kid trying to make an honest buck. I was just glad to never deliver another paper. Edit. Oh boy, this was fun to wake up to. I'm glad this story resonated with so many people. Okay, so I have some edits to make based on all the responses. 1. The only fallout that I witnessed was Don being forced to deliver my route. My super petty and hilarious response was to occasionally wake up early enough to watch him deliver our paper. I'd smile and wave and go back to bed laughing. Lol. 2. Don did tell me I was fired. My mom figured he didn't technically fire me with the company and instead just didn't fight me on not signing a new contract. 3. Okay, the biggest concern most of you have is with the fact that I was a minor and not able to sign a contract. Technically, my only contract was with my mother. She's the one that signed the contract with the newspaper specifically because I was a minor. I don't know anything about the legality of a contract involving parents, kids, and employers, but I made a promise to my mom that I'd honor the contract for 6 months, and so I didn't feel right backing out. She saw that I was trying my best, and that's why she helped me deliver papers sometimes. 4. Some people have assumed this was a small town scummy paper. Nope, it was the second biggest paper in my state, so a big town scummy paper, lol. I actually had 3 routes local to my approximate neighborhood. It would have been an ideal job if I could have nailed down my sleep. And honestly, I didn't mind honoring my commitment, mostly because my mom was going through a bad divorce and I didn't want to add to her problems. I told her I'd do it for 6 months, and I would have, had the paper not changed their distribution policies on such short notice. An apartment complex rented my apartment while I still had an active lease. Arkansas has well-known laws that lean heavily on the side of the property owner, which leaves the renter pretty vulnerable to owners who want to be difficult, to say the least. Or at least they did when I lived there. I doubt much has changed since. So I move into town and find a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, intending for it to be a short period of time while I scout out the town and look for a more permanent place. As for paying rent, they wouldn't or couldn't take an automatic monthly check from my bank or charge my debit card monthly. It had to be a paper check from me with a 4-day late fee window. I hate writing checks, and I had the cash, so I paid out the 12-month lease all at once. I find a great place about 6 months later, thinking I'll just break my lease and pay the extra 1-month penalty and walk away from my apartment. I call and let them know I'll be moving out. Long conversation short, the way the lease is written makes you think that's how it works, when in reality, at a second or third read, I'm still liable for the entire 12-month lease, and to break the lease essentially adds a 13th month worth of rent money. Knowing that up front, why anybody would break a lease is beyond me. So at this point, I've already made the deposits on my new place when all this comes to light, so I'm stuck with two places. I tell the apartment complex I won't be moving out. Figure I'll just go ahead and let the lease run out, set the air condition to 80 and open the breakers to keep costs low. I slowly move my stuff to my new place since I have plenty of time now, and in the end I leave behind my ironing board and iron just to leave something, and I never really use them anyways. About 2 months later, I get a call from the power company asking if it's okay to transfer power into somebody else's name. Shocked, I reply, absolutely not, while laughing a little on the inside. I decide to give it a day before I call the apartment complex. First thing the next morning, I get a call from the apartment complex, and with a super snarky entitled tone, I hear, "We need you to drop the power from your name so the new tenant can take over and move in." I explain that I still have an active lease on the place and can't fathom why they'd rent it out. She accuses me of abandonment, and therefore she is allowed to rent the apartment. My reply went along the lines of, I rent that apartment with the sole intent of having somewhere to iron my clothes. Did you not see my iron and ironing board there? She said she did, and she took it to the office to get it out of the apartment. We go back and forth on the semantics for a little. I let her know that I'm open to receiving a refund to the date on the new tenant's lease, and at that time, I'd be happy to drop my name from the power. She refused, and the call ended with getting her boss's number from corporate. After mentioning to her boss that I can recognize a breach of contract when I see it, and that nowhere in the lease does it say I actually have to live there, not to mention her employee admitting to entering my apartment and stealing items of mine from inside, she quickly assured me that they are putting a check in the mail that day refunding my money to the first of that month, and told me I could go to the office to pick up my iron and board anytime. You'd better rectify this flipping mess you've caused. This happened a couple of decades ago. Names changed to protect the incompetent, etc. It's a bit long, but it's got karma, revenge, reversal, malicious compliance, and a happy ending. Bit of background. I'd been working for a kick-ass, medium-sized IT company for about 4 years. I had a good track record, but had moved to a department that didn't really fit my skills, and very tall director told me I wasn't needed anymore. I thought I was out of a job completely, but managing director called me in, told me that the company needed to implement ISO 9000, a quality standard that aims to formalize all those processes and roles that contribute directly and indirectly to the quality of the company's products. He offered me a job partnering up with an external consultant. The consultant would project manage the effort while I was to be his assistant and full-time liaison person within the company. I later learned that the consultant was a personal friend of the managing director. Of course, I said yes. The consultant was a nice enough person, but it soon became clear that he was out of his depth with the complexities of the project. Luckily, I had a coach, my brother-in-law, who was very experienced in this area and saw the warning signs when I talked about what we were doing. Within the company, there was a lot of skepticism because of an earlier failed project titled Quality Without Limits that soon became Limits Without Quality. So this time around, we needed credibility, some quick, visible wins, and senior management backing. However, the managing director left the company, and that kinda screwed up the senior management backing for consultant. Worse, the new CEO was the very tall director who fired me earlier, and although he knew it was important, he didn't really want any involvement in the ISO 9000 project. Fast forward a couple of months and we haven't really achieved much. My relationship with the consultant is getting a bit strained as I start wondering if I might become collateral damage to his lack of skills and leadership. The consultant asks me to book a few grand's worth of training for the two of us. I had to do it by a certain date. The date passed, he asked about the training, I said I hadn't booked it. He blew up to level 5 and demanded to know why. I said I didn't think he'd secured sufficient commitment from the management to spend that much, and I didn't want to get stuck with an unauthorized spend. Now he's at level 10, and the crap started flying. I was a bit taller than him, and he wanted to go into uber domination mode, so... Sit down. I'm comfortable standing, thanks. Sit down. I'll stay here. Sit the flip down. I'm shaking a bit, but outwardly calm. I'm good. You need to get yourself to the flipping CEO, explain your failure to book the training, and that you're the reason we're going to miss our first big deadline, and rectify this flipping mess you've caused. I really didn't know what very tall CEO would do, and knew that there was a very good chance I'd get thrown off the project and fired, again, but it was time to come clean. So here's how I obeyed the rectify this flipping mess instruction. I got a meeting the same day with very tall CEO and told him that we had barely achieved anything over the several months the project had been running. I said that the consultant was inept, hadn't grasped the basic concepts of the project, and that with him in the project manager role, it was destined for an expensive failure. I told him about the sit down episode. I also told very tall CEO of another person in the company who I'd approached obliquely earlier in the week, who I reckoned would be a perfect fit for the project manager role. This was late on a Friday, and very tall CEO said, "Leave it with me," and told me not to turn up till noon on Monday. I absolutely didn't know what was going to happen, and that weekend was really stressful. Monday morning, I get a call from the consultant, which I ignore, nerves shredding. Now it's noon on Monday and I'm in the building. I'm kind of bricking it. I'm outside the very tall CEO's office and he's there with the guy I suggested should be the new project manager. Good sign. They're laughing about something, another good sign. I walk in. "Hi, meet your new boss." I'm thinking, wow, that went well. Excellent. What happened? Well, I called in the consultant into this office this morning and we had a chat. I'm warming up, and I told him we needed a serious talk about the project and invited him to sit down. He started getting agitated and declined. I asked again. He refused. I said, "Either you sit down or leave the building right now." The consultant sat down, and I explained I wanted to make some changes. Net, he left the building with all his stuff anyway an hour later, but only after I told him why we didn't want him any longer. I have empty speech bubbles coming from my mouth. Thought you might like that bit about him sitting down. I'm still speechless. Okay, come on, let's have a catch-up. I was on flipping cloud 9 for a few days, and the new boss was an absolute star, and I learned a ton from him. ISO 9000 certification followed, and that project success opened up very interesting doors for me later. Change my pay from hourly to salary to rip me off? Alright, we'll see how that goes. This takes place in the before times, when people could eat out and gather in large numbers. I used to work as a chef for an owner who liked to micromanage things and was a bit narcissistic. I'd been working there about 3 years, getting good reviews, customers loved me, updated the menu, made everything from scratch. People used to think the place was open box and heat, serve food. Quality had gone up, morale was great in my kitchen. Annual sales went from 850,000 to 1.4 million, about maximum capacity for the space. The increase in sales and income went to the owner's head. He was always spending money on frivolous things and squandering cash, sound system, stage for the event space, etc. One example, I needed a new Alto sham oven. A used one would have sufficed. Nope, he bought the top of the line one that could be used as a smoker too. 12 grand versus 1.5 grand for what I wanted, which could be bought used. Granted, I enjoyed that piece of equipment. After I left, they no longer used the smoker function. Years later, I still occasionally get emailed invoices from a vendor, and I see they bring in pre-cooked smoked meats now. I was on hourly pay, but then the owner realized during the busy season my sous chef and I put in 70 to 80-hour weeks. Doing this, he realized I made more take-home pay from his business than he did. At peak times, he'd maybe work 40 to 50 hours a week. So to save money, he puts me and my Sue on salary, effectively cutting my pay by about $10,000 a year. My Sue netted a loss of $2,000 a year if we were to work at our current level of effort. During all of this, the owner is saying he is not expecting us to work over 40 hours a week, ever. He even has this written into our contracts. So the extra time off at home with family is okay. I still like the job and my staff. During the slower time, this was great. Also, during this time, I had won a local award for my cooking, and the narcissistic owner was not too pleased. He was no longer recognized as the creative force in the kitchen that bears his name, so his meddling and micromanaging increased. It had gone from, "It's your kitchen, cop chef, do what you want," to, "It's my name and my kitchen, do it this way." Morale and quality began to suffer. Just prior to the holiday season, my Sue wants to go back to his home country for 2.5 months, November, December, and January. Peak crazy times for us. I have good help and am good with it. The owner approved the time off. The owner was thinking I am going to save him some money that holiday season by working my usual 70 to 80 hours a week. Nope. Cue the malicious compliance. I start writing the holiday schedule. Sue is on vacation. I have my 40 hours during key prep times and peak business times. The rest of my staff gets serious overtime. Basically, the Sue and I carried a lot of the weight in the kitchen and could outperform most of our small staff. So, with Sue on vacay and with me only pulling 40 hours, my full-time staff is now working 60-ish hours a week and part-timers are getting 40. Things are running pretty smoothly until the owner realizes I'm not there like I always was during the holiday rush. He's in the kitchen more, trying to micromanage my staff, giving them poor advice, contradicting my directions, and timing for events, screwing up the small parties my staff could handle while I'm off. After a few weeks of this, he realizes he's going to be paying the staff more in overtime than he saved on moving me and my Sue to salary. He starts demanding I work more hours to stop hemorrhaging overtime to the kitchen staff. I show him my contract where I am not expected to work over 40 hours a week. Now he says it's just a guideline. I hold him to the 40 a week. It's Christmas and now I can for once spend time with my family. Now with my Sue having returned, I find I'm burned out from the constant micromanaging and gaslighting by the owner, so I handed the reins over to my Sue and changed careers after 25 years in the industry. I have never looked back. This is John from Slash Bash. Please hit that like button to help with the almighty YouTube algorithm and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.